You know, when we do, and we will, when we do the analytical exercise today, it'll never be more difficult for you, because you hadn't had an opportunity to sit down and get to know it yet. You know, so you're gonna, you know, I'll be able to do what I do, but I've seen all this stuff before. I don't want to say it's a weakness in the test, but basically, the test, it's going to present you with nothing new. So again, it's not that college test where, you know, something is sprung on you that you're not expected. It's not going to happen. I promise you it's not going to. It can't happen, right? So you know, as somebody preparing, exactly what to prepare for. And logical reasoning, which is half the test, look, it's almost impossible to get to law school without performing reasonably well in logical reasoning. You know, you can get to law school without performing reasonably well in analytical. You could even get to law school, and people do, without performing reasonably well in recon. It's not possible to get there, because it's half the test. Right? It's the lawyering skills part. So what I want to do is say, again, we did this in the first class, but it's how do you approach logical, and what are the issues presented? And again, what's so fundamentally different about us, about lawyers, about law, is you read a novel, or you know, you read, but a lot of times you'll read for general interest. A lot of times you'll read to reinforce a position you already have. You know, so if you have a fondness for, I don't know, climate change, you know, you see something written by Al Gore, you may read it. You may read it, and you say, well, why am I actually reading this? And you say, well, one, I have a general interest in the subject matter, and two, this person's going to write something that is good, I'm going to agree with. Well, that's great. That's then, right? You're leaving all that behind, and this is now. And we can always read Al Gore on climate change in our free time, if that's what we want to do. It's not what I want to do, but if it's what I want to do, I would do it. But this is about reading, you're testing an entirely different way of reading, right? Which is, I'm a mercenary and I'm reading for a specific purpose. Okay, that's it. So here's where we start, right? This is what you're going to get asked. And we have spoken extensively about flaws. So every argument you read, right, every single one of them is right here. All right, so we did this in the first class. Just get your arms around this. Do you get that every sentence in logical reasoning presents you with a fact? And a fact is a matter not in dispute. Talk to me. Because it's this transition to reading this different way. So now I'm reading something that I know in the real world is simply stupid, right? The first sentence says, every planet you'll never see is purple. It's about, you know, hello. On the LSAT, the first sentence you read is that every planet you'll never see is purple. What is now a fact? Yeah, but do you get that that's the transition? That's what, I don't get why this is hard. I don't get why anybody struggles with that. I don't care if you agree with it or not. It's fine if you don't agree with it. But if you can't do this, you're not going to be a lawyer. All right? So you say, okay, so whatever I read, so long as there's no support offered for it, it's a fact, which means I can't dispute it. The matter not disputed. So in logical reasoning, you're only reading one of two things. The reasoning is the aggregation of the facts. You're reasoning. You say, well, what is an argument? An argument is reasoning and a conclusion. That's it. Good night. There's nothing else. So again, going to, as a lawyer, if you present me with a fact, right, what you're claiming to be a fact in real life, right, if you present me with a fact of something somebody has written, do you get I'm not going to accept that? In real life, do you get, if you say to me, I read, okay, good for you. to which I'm going to say, who wrote what you read? Does that sound really complicated? Talk to me. Because it's just transition, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you can tell me you read. I'm going to say to you, who wrote what you read? I'm going to ask you, did you have the opportunity to inquire of the person who wrote it? You're probably going to say no. And I'm going to say, well, fine. Present that person to me so that I can examine, get some facts from that person, and I'll let you know what I think. But before then, I don't think anything. So on the LSAT, that's taken away, right? Because then if they put a line down there and they say, Tim said, well, that's what Tim said, because it's fact. Right? But again, so don't mix real life up where we question everything, right? With the LSAT, where you are here to simply accept what is written is. Yes? Okay. So that takes a burden off of me. I know the reasoning. Now, but what they're testing you on is, do you get those slash marks are there to force you to read textually. All textually means two things. One is, I understood what was to the left of the slash mark. Let me know when we need Aristotle, or I've said something that's like, too eggheadish. You want to be lawyers, right? That's how you have to read. You say, okay, I now understand what was to the left of the slash mark, right? You're also then saying, what role in the argument is that playing? Is that part of the reasoning, or is that the conclusion? What's the difference? The reasoning is doing the explaining. The conclusion is what it is you're trying to explain. So you just go home, right, and just like say, okay, wait a minute. What am I trying to explain, and how do I go about explaining it? And that's the difference, right? So when you see, again, just as with a very broad brush, when you say, I disagree, doesn't it sound like it needs to be explained? Right? Because you're saying, I disagree, right? So I'm just Peter from the Bronx. I'm just saying, oh, okay, why? Somebody says, I agree. What am I going to say? Why? Somebody says, I recommend. What am I going to say? Why? Where's Aristotle? So again, it's a broad brush, and I don't mean, again, there's not tricks and shortcuts, but you're being tested conceptually because you want to be lawyers. You got to be conceptual. There's no way around it. Okay? So as you read, you're thinking to yourself, okay, if somebody recommends something, or somebody agrees with something, or disagrees with something, or says to me, I believe something, well, don't you want to know why the person believes it?
Yes.
So here, you're reading for, it's either explaining, which is the reasoning, right? Or it's the thing being explained as the conclusion. And don't you get, when you're working on the main conclusion issue, that's going to be the answer. It's so stupid. Like they're just saying to you, okay, read that, and then tell me what is being explained. I mean, where's Aristotle? Okay. So, does everybody get, I need you to slow down. Don't compromise this process. Just because next week we switch, right? And we're doing like 35-minute, mini things, right? I need you not to compromise the preparation. I so need you to be my tomato sauce, right? This is gonna take time for most of you, not for all of you, right? Because there are gonna be a few freaks in the room. Right, and no, and you know who you are, right? And you just say, oh, no, I get this shit, right? And then the people around you want you dead. Right? So just please, the goal here is to go to law school. The goal here is to succeed. Plan A is June, but it doesn't have to be plan A. Or August, but it doesn't have to be that. It just has to be that road. So the connection between the reasoning, right, which is the evidence. Now again, I want you to become alert and aware. If you're more aware of how the writer is writing, doesn't that put you in an advantage to the person next to you?
Yes.
Besides Terry.
Yes.
come on, but I need you to, because it's so easy and you will, and you have to, I get that, right? But it's so easy to phase in and phase out. You hear sometimes and you got some other times, and yeah, I know, that's fine. But some of the principles are so terribly important. It's so straightforward. So if I'm reading evidence, right, can there be evidence as part of an argument? Can the first sentence present you with a fact that is contrary to the conclusion drawn? Talk to me. Stop and slow down and think. And if you don't, and if you think the answer is no, say, I think the answer is no. Do you get a sophisticated do you want to be lawyers, is that right? Do you think we're more likely to present sophisticated arguments or pedestrian arguments? What would you like to do with your desperate, miserable, empty, hollow life? Would you prefer to do a sophisticated argument or a pedestrian argument? Well, then you have to be sophisticated. But you can do it, right? But do you get a sophisticated argument may involve putting the reader on the reader's heels, giving the reader a false impression. Talk to me.
Yes.
Again, I think I mentioned last. Why do you think every bill I've seen out of Congress is a reform act? Why do you think every bill I've seen out of Congress is called a reform act? What are they what's the impression the writer of the bill is trying to make upon you?
Change.
Well, change, but what kind of change? Oh, yeah, it's reform. So do you get, no matter how do you get, if the Trump administration passes an immigration bill, what's it going to be called? Reform. When the Obama administration attempts to pass an immigration bill, what's it going to be called? Reform. Hello? Do you get the intent? And this is, I'm agnostic as to the writer's political agenda. I'm not agnostic as you guys want to be lawyers. You have to be aware of this, right? So you're looking here and just stop and say, well, wait a minute. This is just not a novel I'm reading for pleasure. If you're reading this and the second sentence begins with the word however, or the second sentence begins with the word but, doesn't that suggest, again with broad strokes, doesn't that suggest that the purpose of the first sentence might be contrary to the conclusion? Well, wouldn't you want to be aware of that? Well, that's the test. So the greater your awareness, the higher your performance is going to be. Okay. So here's the explaining, here's the thing being explained. And the only way to get from the explaining to the thing being explained, there are only two ways. You're either going to proceed by inference or you're going to proceed by deduction, right? Most of logical reasoning is by inference, most of it's by inference. The inference is, again, these just words that, if something is 99.99% likely, is it something that must be true or something that could be true?
Could be true.
Again, welcome to law. So is my death, which to the best of my knowledge has not happened yet, something that must be true or something that could be true? Could be true. Yeah. Right. There's just relative degrees of likelihood. Just some things are ridiculously likely and other things are ridiculous. And if something is 0.01% likely, is it something that must be false or something that could be true?
It could be true.
So inference that's what they are. It's a statement that could be true. It doesn't have to be true. Maybe 99% likely to be true. It doesn't have to be true. So when you're applying the issue of a flaw, don't you have to infer in your own mind what the flaw is? In other words, come back to me, right? The writer creates this thing, and the writer starts with a principle, right? Because that's what law school is. So the writer sits there and says, okay, I want to test you on the difference between a necessary and a sufficient condition. That's where the writer starts. The writer then creates a hypothetical, which is, again, exactly the way law school works. Well, when you're done, don't you have to infer what the writer thought?
Yeah.
I mean, do you know what the writer thought? No, you're inferring it. Could you be wrong?
Yes.
Will you be wrong from time to time?
Yes.
Yeah. If you suck, you'll be wrong a lot. So you're saying, so over here, when you're characterizing what you think the writer did, when you're characterizing it, then it's on the inference side. So you're characterizing what you think the flaw is, right? You're characterizing what you think the assumption is. When they say which is finding most strengthens or most weakens the argument, you're characterizing what you think the writer intended. You're characterizing. All those are inferential. Okay? So you gotta go with your gut where there's a really strong gut. In other words, if you think A is the answer, right? And again, you gotta be really careful here on strength and weakening. But certainly for flaws and assumptions, there can only be one answer. And you've gotta, if your characterization is way off base, then you're not doing this. And you're not gonna be a lawyer unless you change that. So, deduction of things that must be true, meaning from the facts that you were given, right, which are statements for which no support was offered, right, from those facts, another fact must follow, simply must follow. So if you're given a fact that Paris is a city, and you're given the second fact that all cities have trees, what is now a fact that's not stated that must be true?
Paris has trees.
Yeah. So do you get the difference? The entire test is artificial, meaning, as is a courtroom, the entire experience is artificial, right? That again, in a courtroom, what we're set, in other words, before you're going to sit as jurors, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that you agree that the only evidence you'll consider is the evidence produced in that courtroom. You with me? You'll take nothing in from the outside, zero. There was a really interesting exchange because it's artificial. You with me? We're deciding the guilt or the innocence of a person, right? You're requiring me as a prosecutor to present you with evidence that you rely on that causes you to say, I'm persuaded beyond a reasonable doubt of this person's guilt. You must limit yourself to the evidence I present you. You can't speculate, you can't bring in stuff from the outside, and if I don't bring in enough evidence, it doesn't matter that you think the person should go to jail. You with me?
Yes.
And it works in reverse. You have some prejudice when you come into a room, right? You have some sense, well, it's those people. And you've buried it, but it's not completely dead, right? Well, you know what? You gotta leave that outside. And you can't say to Peter, well, you proved your case, but you know what? I have a feeling about this. No. So do you get the world you're coming into, basically, it has this artificial component, right? Don't you see what they're doing? That's like a courtroom. That's all you know. You don't know anything else except what's there.
I would say deductions are like top-down reasoning, right?
I'm sorry?
With deductions, mainly top-down reasoning, right? On the LSAT, where it's like all, then it goes, from there. It's kind of like you're giving like a statement, and then everything goes down to the statement from the top one.
But are you giving me a particular issue?
No, I'm just saying like the structure.
The structure?
Yeah, like deductions, like going from top down.
Well, it can go either way. But normally what they do in deduction, in logical reasoning, is they'll say, if all of the above are true, which is fine, must be true. So you're really going from specific statements to either another specific statement required by those, or to a general statement supported by those. But again, the difference there is how many answer choices can be the credited answer choice if you say which of the following must be true? One. Yeah. So if they ever did that, right, that, okay, all cities have trees, Paris is a city, and answer choice A said, well, Paris has trees, what's the answer choice? A. And then you're saying you've got to think about this in advance. You've got to address a lot of this test is psychology, and it is a high stakes test, and it's purposeful. You with me?
Yes. Purposeful.
But it makes sense, right? Because so much of what we do is high stakes. So I'm not saying, maybe I'm not all that good at it, but when I walk into a courtroom, I can perform. You know, so I'm saying to you, you've got to be aware of, it's not just enough to say, I'm going to sit home and do section after section after section after section under timed conditions. Because what might happen when you go to the test? What might you have? Could you have a meltdown? So you've got to deal with anxiety, and you can't be telling me you're no good at standardized tests. I wonder how many times, ask George, how many times he's read on a application, the applicant saying, I just suck on standardized tests. Well, you know what? Then what are you going to do on the bar exam? So you've got to get past some of this stuff, right? And the psychology here is, again, not to, I have appeared in front of the appellate division, I don't know, let's throw something out there and say 36 times. I don't know. When I appear, do you think I'm prepared?
Yes. Yes.
And when I'm up here, do you think I'm prepared?
Yes.
And do you think when you ask questions, I feel threatened?
No, not at all.
Do you think when I come in, I'm just hoping you don't ask any questions? It's really important, because do you think when I go into a court, I want them to ask questions?
Yes.
Yeah, you bet I do. That's the sauce. You with me? That's when the sauce is ready. It's not to be arrogant, it's to be prepared. And it changes your psychology, right? Don't you think the first time I went into the appellate division, I wanted to wet myself? I think I told you the first time I tried a case, I cried in the car going there. What? We're humans, for heaven's sakes. So it doesn't matter where you are, right? It matters where you can take yourself. And so by analogy, don't you get, if I were taking the LSAT, I would be doing this. I mean, I wouldn't do it, but I would look up the proctor, and I would do this, because it's going to mess everybody up in the room. Like, who's this old white guy doing this? I say, all right, they're giving out the test, and say, I want two of them. I want one from my left hand, I want one from my right hand, I'm ambidextrous, let's make it fucking happen, Chuckles. Let's go. Let's go. And preferably give me two different ones. But do you get the psychology? That you should invite this, you should not resist this. And then the apprehension lessens, right? The fear lessens. So it's preparation that's the antidote for apprehension and fear. It's not that something wrong with you. There's something wrong with you if you're not apprehensive. There's something wrong with you if there isn't some fear. That's not what's wrong. It's what you do with it. So I want you to come into this test prepared. If you don't come in prepared, aren't you more likely to be apprehensive?
Yes. Yes.
Anybody need Aristotle? So you want to get to that point where you're saying, no, 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 no. Give me the fucking test. Right? Now, if you say it out loud, as long as you don't get thrown out of the room, that's cool. Because then everybody's thinking it's Al-Qaeda. I say that son of a bitch is going to blow himself up in the room. Oh, shit. That's fine. That's fine. All right. Psychology is really important. All right.
With logical reasoning, one of the questions I did have, and this always seems to get me every once in a while, is in the setup of my elements, and the term would be, I guess, like 2D order games. I didn't use the word game, my fault.
Well, you said logical reasoning.
Logical reasoning, yes.
Well, now-
The word game just slipped out.
Right, but that's analytical reasoning.
Okay.
But which is it? I think you need to reform your question. That's okay. Take your time. Let me get to what I'm doing.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, you didn't do anything. You keep that up. I mean, it's a little pesty. You keep that up. Wow, what do you want?
I have a specific question.
What's your specific question?
As far as assumptions go. It's super it's necessary.
Okay, you want to take me in, hang on to that, I'd be happy to do that, but hang on to that. Okay, so, everybody get, this is it, right? You're gonna be within your 25 questions per section. We'll go over it, but there are about 5 that will be deductive. 20 or so will be inferentials. Inferentials is much heavier weight. I'm sorry? No, I'm saying your test it's a far heavier weight on inferential than on deduction. Like when we get into analytical, it's all deductive. Every single one of them is deductive. So they're picking up whether you can reason deductively in analytical. They do pick it up in logical, but it's not heavily weighted. And you may find, could you find in your preparation, because again, I don't know how the brain works, but might you find in your preparation, if you're aware of the difference between inference and deduction, if you're aware of that difference, doesn't that allow you to investigate whether you're more naturally skilled at inference or deduction? Talk to me.
Yes.
And wouldn't that inform your exam plan now that you've equipped yourself and have become knowledgeable?
Yes.
So, I mean, it's not super, if you just gave yourself 18 months, right, and just focused on this bloody test, and live your life, I'm not saying don't live your life, right? But you would then be fully prepared.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, and of course, 1% of people are gonna do that, but, okay, 1% of people will be fully prepared. So, is there any term on this board that's not clear to you guys? Right, because every single argument is written this way, right? That word argument means this is all there. When that word argument is absent, it suggests something is missing. It doesn't require it, but it suggests the conclusion is missing. It doesn't require it, but it suggests it.
You honestly feel that way, that if most people do not do well on tests, took 18 months of preparation?
No, I'm not, that's not what I said. I said somebody would be fully prepared if they spent 18 months. I didn't say that somebody who did not spend 18 months would not do well on the test.
No,
Could you
what I was
do
saying-
well without being fully prepared?
No, what I meant to
Yes,
say was like
yeah.
the 18 months, like would that, so you're saying like even the average would not do well on tests if they took a full year and a half and really worked on it? Because like, I mean, some people say you can't do that much better, you're limiting.
Okay, and when you produce those people, I can inquire.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I'm asking you, I'm not giving the, I'm just asking.
I think my position is clear since I've just stated it. There are people who are not going to be lawyers, right? No offense, but so no period of time is going to change that.
Yes.
But in the absence of that, it's such an essential principle to me that this test can be learned. That is so bloody essential to me. That this reasoning, because I learned it. I mean, I'm not thinking. I learned the analytical. You with me? You weren't there when I started doing this in 1996. But you weren't there. You know what I'm saying? I looked, and I had no intentions of doing this. This is purely by accident that I'm doing this at all. But there is a principle, right? The principle is when I looked at the analytical, honest to God, I didn't have a clue what they were doing. Zero. And it took me years. I have no idea how anybody went to law school who took this program in the late 1990s. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't purposeful. So I am evidence that this, at least parts of this, can be learned. I am positive. I am so positive. If you learn this as your technique, right? Again, there are people who are not going to be lawyers, and I get that. I go to my and a lot of people are not going to be lawyers. I go to my family, and it's there were 6 of us, and then there are, God knows, I mean, there must be around 70, I guess, when you go to nephews and nieces and grandnephews and nieces. And how many lawyers do you think there are in that group of 70? One. And that's not because it's the word argument is not the word argue. You with me? People come and say, well, I'm good at arguing. Okay. I look back at this. So, it's getting this down, it's having the discipline. I'm no brighter than any of my siblings, it's bullshit. I got this down. And they don't. And, they made other life choices, and Oh, that's fine.
When studying for the LSAT, you can't like put a blanket rule on everyone, but just like on average, which skills or which part of the tests are easier to develop skills in? For example, do you think it's easier to develop skills in like critical reasoning, or logic questions, or?
Well, personally, I think the most difficult thing to change is reading comprehension. If your academic infrastructure is not, how do I show anyone how to read a law review article? Because it's being written by someone who managed to get it published in law review. So reading comprehension is requiring you to read on the level that the writer wrote. I don't know what I can do other than put damage control in place and say, let's be a lawyer, let's understand our weaknesses, right? Let's minimize those weaknesses on test day. The other two sections, I think, are entirely, they're acquisitions that can be readily made. You get this technique down for logical reasoning, and you just discipline yourself, and you go slow, your score will go up. Now again, you have to be able to do that. And I don't get that. I'm reminded of Alex Johnson. Remember I wrote that video on the board, Alex Johnson, the guy from the LSAC, who used to be the president of LSAC.
Yes.
And at some point he says, we don't understand. That he being an African American, he's saying, I oversee this. I've overseen every one of these questions. This test is race neutral. As far as and you can clearly feel his frustration because minorities underperform in this test. And nobody knows why, right? So I'm in the same position up here. I don't know why folks can't or are unable to acquire the skill. I don't know why. But it is clear that they don't. But the skill is this. The skill is, sure, of course you're logical reading. The more precision with which you read, the more insight with which you read, the higher your score is going to go. And analytical, for sure. If you just lose that fear stuff, again, when we do the analytical today, for some of you it's going to be, I can never do that. But you're approaching this like an infant. You can never do that. You're looking at it for the first time. And that is challenging because you want to be what? So, if anybody could be a lawyer who could look at something for the first time and say, that's nothing, I don't think there'd be much to the profession. So analytical, and again, I'll get into how IRAC applies to that, is very. So for someone who's got a solid academic infrastructure, the reading comp is going to be fine. For someone who has graduated college and is functioning on a high school level, what do you think is going to happen? And it is what it is, particularly for those of us who are in a dense urban area. College is the new high school, and that's not going to work for law school. So, does anybody have any questions about every single logical reasoning argument is built this way? Okay, yes?
Good question.
Yes, no,
So when you
don't
see a
say you're
deduction-
sorry.
When you see a deduction question, that it'll say must be true. Is that what you're saying?
We'll get into specifics.
Oh,
That is
okay.
that is absolutely one way they do it. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Don't ever apologize again for asking questions. I didn't have questions, I wouldn't have a life.